All right, our third session is Enriching GOBI Expenditure Reports with Usage Statistics by Mackenzie Kathmann, who is a collection strategy librarian at the University of Ottawa and recent graduate of the University of Ottawa ESIS program. Mackenzie, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'll just take a minute to share my screen here. Okay, and safe to assume that that's showing for everyone as expected.
Looks great.
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for being here today. My name is Mackenzie Kathmann, and I'm a pretty new librarian. So I started with the University of Ottawa in 2022, pretty much immediately after I graduated. I'm a collection strategy librarian, and I work in the content and access division, which is a large part of our work is to borrow from the collection development policy kind of directly to assess, evaluate, and analyze the collection and qualitative data to develop an informed understanding of collections needs within the University of Ottawa community and to support evidence-based decision making. So with this mandate in mind, today I'm going to be presenting my work on enriching GOBI expenditure reports with usage statistics in order to retroactively assess purchases from the past few years with a view to inform future spending. I want to start by saying that I'm in no way convinced that this is the only way to do this work, nor am I saying that it's necessarily the best way, as you'll see when we get to the lessons learned part of the talk. But I think the main point I'd like to get across is the value of doing this work, resources to help complete the manual tasks required, and then some strategies and food for thought if you're considering a similar project. So this is a little overview of how I'm hoping today will flow. First, we'll start with a project overview to get us oriented, and then some of the questions and discussion that prompted this project. Then I'll discuss how I planned the project and determined what data was needed. And then I'll talk briefly about the actual labor involved in doing the work. And while we won't really have time to go through a demonstration or anything like that, I'll point to some resources, presentations, and literature that helped me complete the work in Excel and Alma. Finally, I'll end by touching on suggested uses for the enriched data, some examples, and of course, some valuable mistakes that I made along the way. I think many of you here will be familiar with yearly GOBI expenditure reports that we receive. Basically, it's an overview of all the purchases our institution has made with GOBI for the year. It includes some analysis information, including things like shipments by LC class, by order type, by fund code, information about spend with different publishers and different ebook platforms, and the like. When we received our most recent expenditure report in May 2023, what stood out to me was the volume of raw data available in the title by title invoice tab. At U Ottawa, we make a significant portion of our purchases through GOBI. So this list of over 8,000 titles invoiced in the past financial year represents a really rich slice of purchasing information. Some metrics included here were like order type, invoice information about fund and cost, and publishing details. So that, coupled with the fact that we have the same data going back 9 years, it just seemed a really incredible opportunity for analysis. I think that being a new librarian, you do kind of have a license to not know things, which I've definitely been taking full advantage of. So I went to my colleagues and I just sort of asked, like, what could we do with this data? What kind of analysis could help us collect more thoughtfully? How could we be leveraging this information? And of course, my lovely team, they were really supportive and they gave some really interesting suggestions. Here are some of the questions that came up during a brainstorming session with the collection strategy team about what we could do with this data. So first of all, how did usage patterns change when we had the plan on versus when we had it in virtual? And how does this compare to spending? For context, during the pandemic, we switched our approval plan with GOBI to virtual, meaning it was still running, but rather than physical books being sent automatically to the library based on the approval plan without anyone there to check or receive them, the collection strategy librarians received slips to review where we would like the books before they were sent. So you could almost think of it maybe as like a mediated approval plan in response to the pandemic. And this question in particular, it arose based on that decision because we wanted to know if usage trends changed when librarians started to kind of do that mediation. How do firm orders compare to approval orders? So this could inform decisions to increase demand-driven acquisition in certain subjects, but it could also tell us where our front list and our subscriptions are meeting subject needs and where maybe they aren't. Where there are duplicates, electronic and print, how does the usage compare? So I think we've all heard that some departments prefer print, but what does the data actually say about that? Is it still true with new cohorts of researchers and students coming in? And how does usage relate to different platforms was another avenue for investigation. So is this indicative of which platforms are most popular with users? And could this maybe even inform where we spend money or where we choose to buy things? So I'm thinking like, could we slip certain platforms because they're not user friendly? Does the data support decisions like that? These are just some of the questions we came up with. But really, what quickly became apparent was that we were missing a key piece of the puzzle, which was usage data. Many of the most pertinent questions that arose, they had to do with usage statistics and knowing how the material we purchased was being absorbed and utilized by our community. So my hope or my intention was that by enriching the GOBI data, we could analyze the use of things we have purchased in the past to answer some of these questions and inform future decisions. So this isn't to say that this presentation will necessarily answer each of these questions, but my goal was to create a data source for investigating some of these topics from the brainstorming session. So this is the part where I kind of naively offered to enrich the GOBI expenditure data with usage statistics. I say naively because I don't think I really had any concept of how difficult or time consuming this would actually be, but there'll be a little bit more on that later. So I spent a really good deal of time researching how I could include usage statistics for all of the material purchased since 2014. This has included speaking with various people in content and access who had experience working with counter statistics and also reading up on usage statistics. And in the end, I landed on these three sources. Counter 4 BR2 reports from 2014 to 2019. As you all know, the standard for counter compliant data changed during the course of these 9 years of data. Most platforms were only able to supply pre-2019 data as Counter 4 reports. And unfortunately, these aren't the best usage statistics. And as many of my colleagues have pointed out in the literature, there are many reasons not to trust this data, as it's not necessarily a good representation of actual use and is captured inconsistently across different publishers and platforms. So this is why Counter 5 usage statistics were released from 2019 to present. In the Counter 5 TRB1 reports, there's unique item requests metric, which is maybe the best representation of what we think of as a checkout of a physical book. So this means that someone has gone to the book and it doesn't matter how many chapters or clicks or how long they were there, it just records one use. And in the literature, they argue that it's similar to how when someone checks a book out, they could read it cover to cover, or they might go to the chapters that they feel are relevant, or they might not use it all. We really don't know how it's being used. And regardless of how it's being used, we just record that one checkout. And then finally, Alma, which is our library system, it records a use for print material as checkouts. And then we also had use checkouts migrated from our old system, Millennium, as a note. So we have print checkout information dating back to 2004. So this information was really easily harvested from our library system. One limitation of this that I should note is we don't record in-house uses at U Ottawa, so I was unable to capture that information. At this point, you're maybe thinking that it's not possible to compare the usage across the different data points as the usage information has been recorded differently over the years due to the counter standard switch. Or it could be like me, you might be thinking that any usage data prior to 2019 is problematic and inconsistently recorded across platforms and therefore unusable. That's why I decided to include 3 different types of usage information in the final report. So the first one here is print use. It's rather straightforward. I just included a column in the final combined expenditure report noting how many times a print book was checked out. Electronic use, so where we have that unique items request metric since 2019, I included the number of uses for those reports as another column in the final data. This was kind of looking forward. So it's only 5 years of data now, but hopefully when we go to do this again in the next 5 years, it could be like a richer data point to look at that time. And then finally, this is where things kind of become interesting. My colleague Ingrid Moiselle pointed me to a wonderful paper by Michael Hughes, How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love the Usage Data. And that led me to include a column where I simply record 1 for has use and a 0 for does not have use. Founded on Hughes's research, I was able to leverage and normalize the counter 4 data just by ignoring the amount of uses and focusing on the fact that the item was used. So this means that for ebooks dating back to 2014, we consistently know what has and has not been used. I also recorded a 1 for the use based on ALMA and Counter 5 data, meaning that in this column of the final report, all ebooks and print books purchased from GOBI since 2014 have a 1 recorded if they've been used, regardless of how many times, and a 0 if they've not been used. So as you can imagine, depending on what you're trying to do, you may want to look at the number of uses and filter for purchases since 2019, or you may want a longer picture and simply analyze whether items purchased since 2014 have or have not been used. I think both options have their use cases and are valid in their own ways. So how I actually did the work. The first thing I did was I took the title by title invoice sheet from each year of the GOBI expenditure reports and I appended them into a combined table. And then that had all the purchases since 2014. Before I appended, I added a financial year of purchase column where I recorded the financial year of each report for each title. I then appended the sheets using Excel, and immediately after, I added the unique ID column so that I'd have my own set of unique identifiers available while doing data manipulation and spot checking. And then finally, I cleaned the ISBN column using the clean and trim function. If you're looking for more information on how to do that, Nat Gustafson Sundell from Minnesota State University presented at this conference last year and provided a really good worksheet on Excel functions, including the clean and trim function. Basically, what this does is get rid of any spaces or characters that don't belong, and it makes a massive difference when you get to the matching part of the work. I'll include a link to that worksheet at the end of this, at the end of the slides. So once I had all the GOBI provided expenditure data in one table, I began the work of inputting the usage statistics. This next phase is definitely the bulk of the manual labor. The first task was to request the usage data from 18 hosting platforms. Most were able to send us their data as two reports, Counter 4 2014 to 2019 and Counter 5 2019 to 2023. Some did send us each year separately, which was, of course, a little frustrating, but I got pretty quick at combining. And then some couldn't quite provide all the requested years of data. So that is definitely a shortcoming and something to note in the final report. And then I cleaned the ISBN column of each usage statistics report using that same clean and trim Excel function. This helped to ensure that when I went to match, I was using the best possible data that I know will match an ISBN and that I cleaned in the combined expenditure data report. Finally, I input the relevant usage metrics into the combined expenditure report using Excel's XLOOKUP function. When I say that this function is the absolute best, I think I found 50 different uses for it. Basically, what it does is it takes a data point from one Excel report, in this case, the ISBN in the GOBI expenditure report, and it matches the identifier to another Excel report. So in this case, the ISBNs in the usage statistics. And then it inputs a correlating field from the second report into the first report based on those matching ISBNs. So in this case, the number of uses. So basically what it allows us to do is populate the GOBI expenditure data with the usage information based on the matching ISBN identifier. I would really, really recommend that everyone get familiar with this function. It's a really good trick to have in your back pocket. I think it works quite well, better than its predecessor, VLOOKUP. And there are a variety of instructional videos on this subject. So I'll link to the Microsoft documentation again at the end of the presentation. So for anyone following along doing the mental math, that's two reports, Counter 4 and 5 times 18 platforms, meaning I repeated the process 36 times, plus a few probably ones that didn't work out. So yes, it was tedious and a lot, but also a little bit satisfying. Okay, so the next step was to pull the print usage information supplied by Alma and input the number of checkouts in the print use column and a 1 or a 0 in the has use column. I ran an Alma Analytics report to get a list of all print books purchased since 2014. As you can see on the screen, it's a really simple report. I then cleaned and trimmed the ISBNs and had to do some data wrangling where there were multiple ISBNs supplied, for example. I delimited the multiple ISBNs into separate columns, and then I ran the matching function against each column until I got the maximum result. I also input a small list of ISBNs into Alma and ran an analytics report to include use for those titles that weren't matching for some reason, likely because they were missed in the original Alma report, maybe due to the date. So at this point, finally, I was finished with data input, and it might be covered in 2 slides, but it definitely was the bulk of the work. But what I had was the output, which was a completely new report. It was a GOBI expenditure report from 2014 to 2023 with usage information. The report includes all the GOBI invoices from the past 9 years and 5 new columns. So financial year of purchase, unique ID, and the 3 columns of use information. So has use, where there's a 1 recorded for all print and electronic books purchased from GOBI since 2014 that had been used, and a 0 for those that had not. Print use, where the number of checkouts was recorded for each print book purchased from GOBI since 2014. And finally, electronic use, being the number of unique item requests for all ebooks purchased from GOBI since 2019. And finally, just to note that I also normalized the fund codes as they had changed quite a lot over the past 9 years. So I just narrowed them down a bit by changing some of the outdated ones to fit the more narrow fund structure we're currently using. This just helped by allowing us to filter the data into kind of like more meaningful categories when doing the analysis. So now for the fun part. On this slide, I've included some suggestions for using and analyzing the data. Um, so you could use it to analyze purchasing and spending trends over time to see where we're collecting and perhaps come up with some strategies going forward with future spending so that we could be more deliberate with our choices. Analyze use trends by subject, department, format. This will give you a picture of what our students and faculty are actually making use of. So do we notice that ebooks are being used significantly more than print, or where we collect in both English and French? Do we see any trends emerging there? It can also inform approval plan management and decisions because we can tweak the approval plan based on our findings and make changes to what material is being sent automatically. This is an opportunity also to find areas where we're under investing or over investing. Are there areas where our spend isn't scaled to the amount it's being used? And finally, this is an opportunity to find areas where firm orders are outperforming approval items. This could mean that our approval plan settings and front list agreements are not meeting the needs of certain groups, and it could require adjustment. I've included this disclaimer here because I know this will be raising red flags for some of the people in the room. And so I want to emphasize that usage is absolutely not a perfect measure or enough to go on its own. What it can do is signal us to investigate certain subjects and see why those items don't seem to be as heavily used. So it could be that a professor is retired or a microcredit program was discontinued, and so topic interests have simply changed. Or maybe it's a small department and their use is in line with their size, meaning there aren't any adjustments required. Additionally, there could be equity, diversity, and inclusion related considerations and preservation reasons to collect in certain areas despite being low use. I'm thinking here like our commitment to collect works from marginalized voices that are outside the mainstream and resultingly, of course, lesser used. This data should be used as a signal for investigation and not a tool to make final decisions. It's really just one quantitative data point that we can use to trigger a balanced qualitative analysis and assessment. And once something, say a subject or a publisher, is flagged for investigation, it's absolutely essential that investigation is thorough as always and includes all the normal avenues for assessment. So speaking with the departments, consulting with RLs, looking at research outputs and course offerings and all that good stuff that we're used to. Okay, so I was kind of looking for two examples that I could share here that wouldn't require my sharing too much private information about spending. The first example demonstrates how you could systematically analyze the data to highlight pain points or areas for further investigation. I simply created a pivot table in Excel where I extracted the average cost per use of different order types, most notably firm orders, approval plan slips, and continuations. There's a fair bit of noise in this table as the order types have changed over the years, but something very clearly stands out, and that's that the cost per use for continuations is exceedingly high. For me, this signaled that maybe we're spending too much on continuations, meaning automatically purchasing books in a series, despite the fact that they're not being used. This prompted me to look at continuations we have set to come automatically and assess whether there were any that should be stopped. This results in annual savings, and while it isn't maybe groundbreaking, it's just one example of this data signaling pain points in our collection processes. Now for this example, I decided to include it because it highlights how once we have the output report, we can use the data creatively as a quantitative data bank to answer questions as they arise. So this wasn't really my intention, but it definitely became a valuable resource in that way. I was really happy with this email because it came kind of at the perfect time. I had just sort of finalized the data. Basically, a PhD student asked me if a book we had on causality was well used, as they feel causality is going to be a really hot topic with the advent of AI. And I think they wanted to get a sense of if this idea was gaining traction with our community. He was talking about two books in particular, and I was able to tell him that they had been used 19 and 6 times respectively. He then followed up asking if this was considered good use or not. Fair question. I was able to then go to my GOBI data, filter for the BD call range, and determine that these books were very well used by our specific University of Ottawa community, as the average book in this subject was checked out 2.23 times. While this isn't an exact science, it does tell me something about the popularity of this book compared to a large sample of others in the same subject. Specifically the popularity of this book and subject with the University of Ottawa faculty, researchers, and students. These investigations could even be done systematically to get a sense of which topics are popular with your researchers. And this insight could be really valuable. So just a more kind of creative way to use the data that I didn't necessarily see coming. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about, but certainly not least, is I have some lessons learned and words of wisdom for anyone who might be thinking of taking on a similar project. There's really no particular order, but the first thing is this takes a lot of time and data input energy. So it can be a really great summer project if you have the capacity, but I wouldn't underestimate, I should say, the effort that it takes to ensure that you're going to maximize your returns by having thoughtful research questions prepared and buy-in from colleagues. So just making sure that any team members know about this work and are following along, and so that they're thinking of ways to use the data once they have it. XLOOKUP should be your new best friend. I've already said this, but I found so many ways to use it. I really want you to learn it. It's really not overly difficult to master, and it's well worth the effort. Even if you're not going to do this project, just learn it anyway. Keep detailed process notes. I did, and that's how I was able to put this information together for all of you. It also helped me answer questions for my colleagues and refresh my memory. Again, this process, it can be really tedious at times. So if you don't keep good notes, you're going to likely lose track of things. Most importantly, I'd say, is maybe a master sheet of what you've gotten to with the counter data input for each platform, and maybe a step-by-step document that just tells you what you've been working on. Spot check your data as you go and keep versions handy. With this much data input and copying and pasting and whatnot, you're bound to accidentally shift something or make some kind of mistake that might not be so obvious. But the sooner you catch those mistakes with a spot check, the better, trust me. The unique IDs that I created really help with this part. So I really encourage you to take that advice. And finally, it's not the kind of thing you would do every year. So think about how much data you have available and whether now is a good time. Or maybe you should wait a few years. For us, as I was on contract and at the time, it just made sense for me to do it last year with 9 financial years of data. Obviously, 10 would have been nice, but that's how it worked out. And I originally thought that's with data, we could update it regularly each year. But the workflow, it just really doesn't scale to that. I'm now thinking every 5 years would probably be more realistic and worthwhile. So just keeping that in mind at the start of the project. Yeah, so thank you. I've just included here a couple of my references and just some links to help with the functions that I mentioned, and my email if there are any questions or any thoughts on this after the conference. But I think there's still a bit of time for questions, so I'll leave it at that.
Yes. So thank you very much for that presentation. I really enjoyed hearing about your project and seeing the process. So thanks a lot for sharing it. A lot of people in the chat shared your enthusiasm for XLOOKUP. So something I'm interested in looking into. We have several questions, and I'll get to those. Someone asked, can you include a link to that paper by the ease of use paper you just referenced? Was that on your final slides? I
Sorry,
didn't catch.
which paper?
Let's see, a link to that paper by the quote unquote ease of use paper you just referenced. So that was towards the beginning of your
Toward the
presentation.
beginning. I think it would be the How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love the Usage Data, the one that my colleague had recommended.
Okay, great.
Ease of use, maybe, but Gwen, if that's not the one, message me in the chat and I'll get you the one. But yeah, I have some links on the. Maybe I'll just. Would it make sense, do you think, to share the references in the chat, and then that way
If
anyone
you'd
who
like to
wants
do
it can
that,
have
that's
it?
great. We will
Cool.
be sharing your slides to everyone after the conference, but if you'd like to do both, also just letting everyone here know if people share resources in the chat, I'll go through them after the conference and sift them out just so no useful resources get lost in the shuffle. So those will be shared as well. So yeah, whatever you decide to do is fine because everything will get shared.
Okay, I've popped it in the chat if there's people who can't wait, or if it's not
Great,
the one,
thank
let me know.
you. All right. In the meantime, I'll get to the next question. How do you get the in-house usage statistics? These are the books from stacks that students use in the library but do not check out.
That's a really great question. So we don't capture in-house usage statistics, unfortunately. I know that some libraries do. I think the idea is that someone takes it and then when they're getting cleaned up from the tables or the workstations, they check them kind of back in as having been off the shelf, but we don't do that. So we don't have that. It would be in Alma though, if we
Thank
did.
you.
There's a
Next
category there to do
question.
it, but we don't use it.
Yeah, I mean, it's in-house use is always tough because, people put things back by themselves, things don't always get registered.
Mm. Everything that's
Um,
missing and we don't know where it is in-house
Yeah,
use.
also that. Was quote unquote has use differentiated by year of use, or was all use during the multi-year period considered one for has use?
Yeah, so I didn't differentiate year by year of use. Honestly, this was probably just reflective of how much time and energy I had to put into the project. I think that would be really great to have it year by year for sure. But I didn't.
All
You
right.
could though, for sure. Absolutely.
Thank you. Next question. This is an important topic for all library departments. You've done a great job. I agree. Did you find any trends toward ebook usage versus print book usage?
Yeah, one of my colleagues is kind of delving into this in more detail, so I mostly don't want to step on his toes too much, but I will say I think it's kind of as we expected that ebooks are getting a lot more usage than print for the most part, sad to say. As a
Hmm.
bit of a print girl myself.
All right. How did you go about learning new skills in an area of interest pertinent to your role as a new librarian? What helped you become more comfortable doing this work? Great question.
Yeah. How do you have about learning new skills? Yeah, well, we're really lucky, I will say, in our department that we have because we're centralized and we have a great manager, there's kind of this opportunity that if something comes up and you're really interested in it or you kind of float it as an idea, they do give you the license to kind of follow it through, which is really great. As I mentioned in my project, I certainly leaned on my team a lot. So what happened really was a colleague said, "Oh, here's our yearly GOBI stuff," and I kind of got my wheels turning, and I had the time and then I had the time to work on it, and so in a group meeting, I just kind of brought it to the floor and I gauged the interest of my colleagues, and then I kind of just followed where that path led. And I would say to become more comfortable doing this work is just like have really good colleague support. I was able to talk to a lot of people in the department and ask my questions, and everyone was really great about that. So I was just able to kind of follow my whim a little bit. But yeah, always just actively kind of thinking critically when something new comes along, I think, and like what could we possibly do with this has helped me kind of keep it interesting and learn new things and whatnot.
Great, thank you. Um, in the presentation and visualization of your results, how did you overcome the problem that 2014 purchases had 9 years of usage data, but 2023 purchases had less than 1 year?
Yeah, I think you mean like because obviously there's going to be more use for older things. This is something that I struggled with a lot, and I was actually asking some of our like math librarians what the calculation is to like manage that what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, yeah, so I talked to some of the math librarians and we kind of came up with a calculation that each year, off the top of my mind, each year is like point three. The increase is a certain amount of like just generic, like above across the board, it increases by 20%, whatever it is, kind of thing. And this many flip from zero to having use. So there's a calculation there. I can try to dig it up. It's been a while since I thought about that. Um, I
All
can
right.
dig it
Well,
up though and
yeah.
send you an email, Chris.
If you do, you can, send that to us and we can share that out as
Okay.
well when we share out the rest of the answers to the questions because there are several and we probably won't get to all of them, but we do have time for a few more. Um, let's see. Did you have any cases where you couldn't make an ISBN match between the Gobi data and the Alma data? And if so, how did you handle this? Did you have a way to differentiate between cases where there was zero use and cases where there was just no data match?
Yeah. So ISBNs can be really, really tricky to match for sure, but mostly because we were getting the data directly from a vendor, the ISBNs that they had matched pretty well with the platforms that they were providing access to, which was good, like in terms of the ISBNs matching. Although that said, there was a couple of platforms where the matching wasn't very good. And I went to Gobi and I said, "Oh, can you get me the unique IDs? Can you get me this data again for all of I don't think it was ProQuest, but say ProQuest and get me the unique IDs. And then they sent those through. And then I was able to match the usage data to the unique IDs in some cases. So there was a little bit of data manipulation in that way. Um, but mostly, but mostly it was not too bad with the matching. And in my experience, ISBN matching has been really bad. So yeah, that was a pleasant, not too big of an issue. Does that answer that question? And then yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think we are at time now, unfortunately. I do see more questions and we'll forward them on to you, and then we will share those answers out with everyone after today's conference. So I do want to thank you again for presenting today, and thank you.
Thank you.